Brabs, welcome to the Tales of Leadership podcast, brother. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Good morning.
Yeah, it's always fun to have that initial dialogue when we've probably been talking for like the last 15 minutes, right?
Yeah.
It's great to have you on the show. And I think number one, I want to say thank you for being a guest on this show. This is the first episode that I've got to film in the past 6 months. I had to take some hiatus off. And I think it's awesome to have you on because we both kind of do the same thing, but on different spectrums within the Army right now. But I'd love to get an opportunity just to have you kind of like quickly introduce yourself to the listeners.
Yeah. Um, Happy Saturday morning, everyone. Michael Brabner, kind of go by Brabs for short. Currently serving as an officer in the United States Army, coming up on the 25-year mark. So I did 14 years operationally in the infantry. So all jobs within an infantry battalion, basically from private rifleman up to Battalion S3. After completing 26 months of rifle company command, which was kind of like what I consider to be my Super Bowl ring in the Army. And then after that, I learned about this little thing called acquisition, and I was mentored into that. Um, I did the voluntary transfer process, kind of, both knees into the breeze, jumped into it, and done every job across the acquisition lifecycle. So everything from JCIDS all the way up to DMIL, to include program management, JPO, armaments and ammunition, science and technology advisor, to the two-star commanding general at the Fire Center of Excellence. Right around the same time, the Army Futures Command came out, both the number 1 and 2 cross-functional teams being there at Fort Sill. Then transitioned down to Operational Test Command at Fort Hood. Was a test officer for almost 4 years on so many big tests, planning. So got to work that piece, doing follow-on tests, initial operational test and evaluation, working with DOT&E, some really cool programs. And then had the opportunity for my last job in the Army to do robotics. And at the time, I didn't put a lot of thought to it. I was kind of I was part of that bad culture, where we had the RQ-11 Bravo or Charlie Raven. Josh, you probably have the same experience. We didn't use it. We weren't good users of technology because those systems were looked at as expensive tools, and if you had any mishaps or anything go wrong, your neck was on the block for the guillotine by your chain of command, for either financial investigation or property loss or a 15-6. So we didn't use those tactical tools. So when I came into this job and was hired by Colonel, now retired, Rob Ryan, he said, "Look, you're off the leash. You have no left and right limit. You have no SDZ." He goes, "All I want you to do is just win, go." So I've been doing that for the last almost 3 years now. We've had some major accomplishments, and I think we're gonna dive into that. So thanks for having me on, Josh.
Yeah, no, and you and I do share that. I remember being in Afghanistan, and we never used the Ravens that we had. One, because they were extremely difficult to use because we had to get a RAS set up in place, and then the time that we would actually get the approval to use those things, we wouldn't need them anymore. So we would just like work around that technology. But I start off with, I think a great place is if you can kind of define leadership in your terms. How does Brab see leadership?
So I really think leadership is an evolutionary process. Um, you have to be introspective, and you have to try, and you have to be not afraid of failing. Those are lessons I learned early on in life, mainly through the Boy Scouts of America.
Mm.
And I'm still really involved with that. My son is now in the troop. I'm on the committee. I'm a high adventure coordinator. Um, I'm also assistant scoutmaster. So constantly putting yourself in new situations, you will find that you have to develop a Rolodex of tools. You have to be the Home Depot, right? You can't just be the screwdriver or the hammer or the nail. You really have to be very eclectic in your approach, and you gain new skills and attributes based on your character, your morals, and then your tactical and practical application of leadership across a wide range of scenarios in your daily life. So it, it takes leadership to be a father, um, to a son and a daughter. It takes leadership to be a husband, you know, to my wife. You have to build relationships, and then once I cross the threshold on my commute in the morning, I'm building relationships. I'm using that time to make calls, listen to podcasts, make myself smarter, get my mind
Good.
right before I cross the threshold into the skiff at my office in Robotics Requirements Division, and then work with my team, with my deputy, Mr. John Dudas, who's a rock star, probably one of the best capability developers in the United States Army. Brian Reed, who's my lead Cape Dev, working annexes for me to the Joint Small UAS CDD, and what are their needs, and how can I exercise some humility to put my wants, desires, or what's priority in my life on pause to prioritize what's in their immediate target zone. What's in that 25 to 50 meter target zone that they're trying to focus on, so they can chop wood and help us accomplish our mission. So leadership's it's evolutionary, and every day you're going to face new challenges. And if you're not facing new challenges, you need to get out there and not be afraid to go to the shooting range and take some risk. And then when you get dialed in on that bullseye, then you just you keep stinging that bullseye. Then you build up that repertoire of success and application.
I really wanted to do like kind of a quick deep dive into those 11 points of leadership that you sent me last night, because
Yeah.
that's amazing. And it's funny that I run a leadership podcast and I've never came across this topic yet. Uh,
Yeah.
when you first had that, like through the Boy Scouts, how did they kind of go through those leadership skills with you? Was it like a crawl, walk, run of like, hey, here's the 11 tenets that we abide by when it comes to leadership development, and then how did they instill that in you at a young age?
It's the be no do model, right? So when you come in,
Mhm.
I don't know, where your sons are in life. This was the model that I followed. So, I did Cub Scouts, but when I got to Boy Scouts, you come in and you're part of a patrol. And I didn't realize it at the time, but the boy leaders in the troop, all the way, from my patrol leader to the quartermaster, the chaplain, the librarian, um, uh, the secretary, all the way up to senior patrol leader, they had all been trained. They'd all been trained in
Mm,
those 11 points of leadership at national youth training camps in YLT. Um, our scoutmasters were all wood badge trained, so that's kind of like the premier uh, executive leadership course. And so there's models, there's layers, just like the sedimentary layers, the Grand Canyon, and you build on that, right? You create a mountain of a mountain or a library of leadership potential, and everybody's working on it, and then you're working on it together. So you get to the teaming aspect. So um, as I got older and I was put in leadership positions, I had to learn. Um, I had to learn my style, and a lot of that was emulating those that I
yeah,
saw who were successful. So growing up
yeah.
in a naval community, constantly being around, Top Gun graduates, guys that fly at the, speed of, faster than the speed of sound, mock whatever with their pants on fire. Um, I learned a lot of leadership attributes, and I wasn't always, kind of the loud giant I am. My son's like that now. He's very quiet. He's calculative. He listens a lot. So my younger years were very formational in that I had to learn the skill of active listening. And then as I
Mm,
got older, and you get put in leadership positions, you have to make a decision. Kind of goes back to
yeah,
the old Ranger School adage, like, what are you going to do, PL? But you have
yeah,
to make decisions, and that's when it's go time, and that's when you have to say, hey, what kind of leadership style or tactic am I going to apply? Is it going to be transactional in combat,
yeah,
where you're the commander, you're the platoon leader, you're the squad leader? You have to make a decision. You have to direct. Am I going to be a coach? In my job now, I'm more of a, kind of a servant, democratic visionary, in what I do. I've never been laissez-faire. There's times when you can be laissez-faire, like when you're in front of your company in the morning and you can just tell they're just beat down after a week of training and
Yep.
you just don't really feel like doing an 8 mile run, and so you could kind of be a little more laissez-faire and yell zonk and release them, and the
Yeah.
morale, you've heard the word zonk, man. It's like it's
Oh yeah, I've got a good story on that one.
it's a shot of adrenaline, but back to the 11 points of leadership. It was, getting and giving information, understanding group needs and characters or characteristics, um, knowing and using the resources of the group. I think that's a big one. I learned that.
Yeah.
I learned that in the National Guard early on when I was enlisted. I had a team leader who was a nuclear physicist at the nuclear plant in Central Washington, and
Oh,
he's like, "Hey, I want to be a team leader. I want to be an E5. This is where I love coming and working, and then my real job is really hard. He's a nuclear physicist, right? Working on reactors. He's like, I come to do the army for the camaraderie, the teamwork, and just being around friends and just working towards a common goal. National defense or homeland security. When there's a tornado or hurricane or a mass disaster like Hurricane Helena.
yeah.
So that part of like my early introduction to being a soldier and then commissioning and being an officer in the Florida Army National Guard really opened my eyes to all kinds of leadership and all kinds of bad leadership too.
Yeah.
We've all had toxic leaders where you're like, I wouldn't follow that guy. I wouldn't follow that guy into combat. But sometimes you do, right? I was watching Band of
Yeah.
Brothers with my son last night. He's like, that Captain Sobel guy is kind of a jerk. And I was like, yeah, son, I worked for a few of those, but
Yeah.
you learn too. It may feel bad. It may not be a good experience while you're in those roles or positions, but the men, the mission, and me, right? You find a way, and then when you're in a leadership role, you're like, I don't want to be viewed that way. I don't want that to be my legacy. So it says cumulative effects that just kind of grow and build with you within your heart and soul over the course of your life and your career.
I I think that that's a very powerful piece of wisdom right there, is that in bad leaders, you have probably even more profound, wisdom that you can gain from versus good leaders. Like good leaders, it's easy to emulate because it's good behavior. Bad leaders, it's hard to find the things that they're doing well and then to isolate those and what you want to replicate as a leader yourself, because you talked about that at the beginning. I think we all go through that like emulation phase of like where we're kind of like a mockingbird in a way until we kind of find our stride.
Yep.
But bad leaders, the most important thing that I found out, and that's the blessing and the curse, I think, of being in the military, is you have really great leaders, and I think they outweigh the bad. But when you have bad leaders, I mean, they're bad, like super bad, like borderline, like toxic, and it changes just the whole organization. But how do we not replicate those behaviors? And then using those as like a burning desire almost, that I am never going to do that because I know what it feels like being on the end of it. The another thing that I love that you said, and what's one of the tenets of the 11 principles, is understanding the needs and the tools of your team. I think that's critical too. And I think that's one thing that most people are missing nowadays, is like getting a full uh, survey of your team and what strengths everyone possesses uniquely. And then how can we harness that collectively to go do this hard task, this disruptive thing. And if you can learn how to do that, I really think that's what sets you apart from other people, like within the requirements realm in the big army right now. Is like, well, number one, you got like a deep passion for it, which you have to have. You have to care for it. And then you have to learn how to harness your team towards that vision. And that's awesome.
Yeah. What a lot of people kind of forget, um, but they always have to acknowledge and come back to, is in the Army, any service branch really, um, you could die and
Yeah.
others could die that you're in charge of. So that puts an extra level of stress and ownership and accountability on leadership. Um, you know, if I was just, going into work when I was at Picatinny Arsenal, I'm not discounting or discrediting the civilian workforce here. It's like you're probably not going to die
Yeah.
in the daily execution of your duties and responsibilities, unless, you're handling explosives or doing other things. And I use Picatinny as a perfect example because there's some wizards up there that do some amazing stuff with armaments and ammunition and explosives and other things. They call it the home of lethality for a reason. But you're going into a job, a civilian job, you're probably not going to die, and people in your workforce probably aren't going to die. But you're training up at NTC and JRTC or JPMRC, and you're going to the two-way petting zoo.
Yeah.
So you always have that. You're always carrying that cross. You're always shouldering that burden, and it gets pretty heavy at times too. And it crushes a lot of people. And then those that rise up to the challenge, I think they experience an exponential level of spiritual and personal growth.
Yeah.
Because if you're in a leadership position, you are held to a much higher standard. Um, yeah.
I think I had a very a very impactful lesson that I learned when I just took over my platoon in Afghanistan. It was probably like a week before, and before that time, like I was the night battle captain, so I was pushing, SIGACs and reports and like just monitoring, making sure the battalion was staying afloat. One of the hardest things for me at go be the platoon leader to get recognition, get awards, go get in firefights, go to Ranger Regiment. Like I was super gun ho. Like that's what I wanted to do. That's why I joined the infantry. Like I want to go do bad things to bad people. And then I went to one of my platoon's memorials for Sergeant Rodriguez, and that's where I got to meet my platoon for the first time. And like we're in theater,
Mm.
you only see those things in like movies, but like just the emotional like response from the platoon, like grown men, like steely-eyed killers that are doing bad things to bad people, just like breaking down. And then I sit there and I like ponder myself of like how selfish I was at the time to like kind of go in with an agenda and an ego. What leader does this platoon need at that time? And then adapt to that environment. And then that set me on a path of kind of humble leadership within a way of always being humility at my core because I know what a bad day looks like. And this isn't a bad day. And that always goes back to my motto is every day is a gift. I don't want to waste mine because I know what a bad day looks like. Dude, I love that. That's straight like fire, Brabs. So I would like to like shift it over to what drove you to join the military? Because you were in the National Guard first, and you spent how long when you get ready to retire? Like cumulative total of service?
That'll be over 25 years total service.
Dude,
So
that's awesome, brother.
yeah, it's I always knew I was going to go into the military. Believe it or not, I thought it when I was young. I told you I grew up in the son of a naval aviator, so I was
Yeah.
always around the jet jockeys, right? And so delusions of grandeur. Sometimes life has a way of telling you where you need to go versus where you want to go. So as I
Mm,
grew to be like 6'8", and then I wasn't blessed with my father's like perfect vision. Laughing right now as I wear glasses. I wasn't going to be sitting in the cockpit of a F-14 Tomcat or an F-18 or an Super Hornet. Doing that. I'm like, hell, I pass out on roller coasters, right? So um, when I started doing that, they were like, yeah, you're too tall. But now, being 42, I was like, I would fly a C-17 or a C-130 like all day long, right? Because I got some friends that do that and they have great lives. But you evolve over time. So I was in college at Washington State University. Woke up, the morning of September 11th. My mom called me and she's like, "Turn on your TV now." I was like, "What's wrong?" And turn it on, and you see what's going on in New
mm,
York City. And I'd never been to New York City, but I think it just hit a lot of Americans in the fields. And I went in with two of my best friends in college at the time, and we all enlisted, and we're standing there talking to our recruiter, and they went to be 88 mics, and I was like, I'm gonna do this infantry thing because my scoutmaster was an airborne ranger, and he always made fun of my dad. It was really funny. There was always kind of a rift between them. The son of a naval aviator in a scout troop run by an ex-Army Ranger. So like that whole paradigm, right?
Yeah.
And the way he led our troop and taught us was a lot, MDMP, um, uh, 11 points of leadership, the patrol method, which, you learn small unit tactics, at Ranger School and uh, basic and advanced individual training,
Yeah.
IOBC, Captain's Career Course. So when I joined the Army, I called my dad and I was like, "Hey, I did something today." And he's like, "What'd you do?" And I was like, "Well, you remember how you told me like when I graduated, I had to go to college, and that was non-negotiable, and that you weren't going to pay for it." And he goes, "Yep, I remember. I told you that for your entire adolescence." I was like, "Well, I found a way to kind of pay for it. Aside from working 3 jobs, I joined the Army." And he said a few colorful words, and then he hung up on me. And then he called me back like an hour later, and he's like, "I'm just happy you didn't join the Air Force. I think we can deal with this." So, um,
No, I love that.
yeah, so that's how I came in, and I joined the Washington Army National Guard, enlisted, and then I stayed in school, and then I was in the chow hall one day, and a senior um, ROTC cadet came up, and they're like, "Hey, are you in the Washington Army National Guard? Are you 11 Bravo?" And I was like, "Yeah, yeah." Like, "You want to do ROTC?" And I was like, "Nah, I hate officers." And you know, he goes, "We'll pay you." And at the time, I was really poor, right? And I go, "How much?" And he's like, I think stipend then was like $150 or something. And I was like, that was a significant jump in my pocketbook, right? So I did that, and when I graduated, I commissioned into the Florida Army National Guard. I was recruited down there by Major Haas, who is now the Adjutant General of Florida, and went down there and went in with my hand raised. I volunteered for everything. I went to every school he'd send me to. I worked on battalion staff. I was a platoon leader, executive officer. Worked for the S4. I was a transition
Mm,
officer. As that infantry battalion transitioned to be a cavalry squadron. So I learned, MTO equipment. I learned property book, and I was put in charge of some big things for a platoon leader, a second lieutenant, and then a first lieutenant in my time in the Florida Army National Guard. Took my platoon overseas to do an exchange in Folkestone, England, with the Royal Irish Ranger Regiment.
oh,
Um,
that
you
sounds
know,
awesome.
it was really cool. And as a first lieutenant, I was like, man, the Army like gives you a lot of opportunity to do some cool stuff.
Yeah.
Managing and driving convoys in excess of 100 vehicles across the battalion to go respond to Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Rita.
Yeah.
How that just devastated the Gulf Coast. So I really got to do the soldier citizen mission, and be a servant leader to the community. That's what I
Yeah.
really liked about the National Guard is you get, knowing and using the resources of the group. I could have a sheriff's deputy who's on the Escambia County SWAT team. I could have an electrician. I could have a plumber. I could have a school teacher as my company commander, and all the skill sets they brought from their civilian careers into the military made it a really fun organization to be a part of. And then in 2007, every day I logged into HRC St. Louis at the time before they moved to Knox, and they had this limited call to active duty one day, and I applied to it, and I was one of 11 National Guard infantry officers that was picked up to come on active duty, and I did that in 2007.
Mm,
So that's when I started my active time. And then, at the time I was stationed in Panama City Beach, Florida, working active duty special work for my battalion for then Major Haas, and me and Teresa, my wife, we made that jump and we came on active duty, and we were really blessed with some really good assignments at the 101st, where I did my combat tour in Baghdad during the surge, and then doing rifle company command in 3rd Brigade, uh, Charlie Company 227, the Wolfhounds out in Hawaii. So getting paid to surf the big waves at the North Shore, and have some of the best experiences in life. And I said earlier that was my Super Bowl ring. Train with them for 12 months, and then
yeah.
deploy for 12 months to Afghanistan, to what was one of the most austere, like mountainous fighting regions in RC-East
Yeah.
Kunar province, and solve some really hard problems and do those things right. Carry carry Skedcos that are your friends are in, draped with an American flag, being picked up in the dark of night by a PJ helicopter. Um, it brings everything full circle. So, and the rest is just kind of writing on the wall. Not discounting everything in those 25 years, but active duty it's been fun, and I see the end now. And when I took this job from Rob Ryan, people are like, oh, a lot of people just go to CDIDS or Maneuver Center of Excellence to kind of wither away and die. And I was like, no, I kind of looked at it like a cancer diagnosis. I was like, I'm going to get every drop of juice for the squeeze I can in this job. So when I moved here to Fort Benning for the 5th time in my career, I took a deep breath, and on July 1st, 2022, hit the ground running with small UAS. Didn't know much about it. My own experience in robotics was what I didn't do with the RQ-11 Bravo, the Raven, in Baghdad or Afghanistan, and came in, but took all those lessons learned. Just went through the Rolodex of vignettes, combat vignettes, training vignettes. Said, hey, if I had these systems in Iraq or Afghanistan, how would I have used them? If my platoon had something as simple as a soldier-borne sensor to fly, up hills, check IV lines, rat lines the Taliban were using to come in from Pakistan and fight us. Would my company medic, Doc Joseph Altman, would he still be alive? If he had that tool. And so every day I go into the office with my team, like I always have that in the back of my mind. It's like, how can we make these systems better? How can we do the hard work, chop the wood to build the fire, to be agents of change within the Army, which we all know change in the Army it's tectonic. It's a glacial process, right? It's very slow to shift. How can you be an agent of change, a disruptor, and leave the Army as sunset here in 7 months, 5 days, leave the Army better than it was when I joined in December of 2001.
I don't think there's anyone that is more qualified and has a deeper passion than the position that you're in right now than you. And I love that mental concept of like a cancer diagnosis. I've never heard of that before, but I love that. And I think you're spot on. Most people go to requirements and they look at it as like a curse. And I think you and I kind of share that in a way of where I moved to Fort Polk after MCCC, and everyone was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." I ended up extending to do 2 commands there, and I had some of the best times with my family and like professionally leading a rifle company and a HHC company. It is what you make of it. And if you go into those types of situations where most people like, oh, this is going to be horrible, it's going to be horrible because you've already set your mindset to that. But if you go in, I'm going to be an agent of change, and I'm going to be as disruptive as possible in a positive way, so the next person that comes in can have all the obstacles removed, and then they can just move forward to try to make as much progress as possible. And that's one of the reasons I really deeply respect you, is that you're willing to put that hard work in, but you do it in a way that is inspiring to everyone around you. So yeah, this is incredibly difficult work, but everyone, especially because I got to meet your team, they're happy to do it. And that's a rare person that can inspire people to go chase hard things, but be happy while you're doing it. And I think it's just that charisma and that passion that you share from your experience. But I want to back up because you shared something with me last night, and I would be remiss if we don't talk about this. Your experience in Ranger School. Walk me through that, because I know it was easy, but like cumulatively, like at the end of that, what did you earn? Because I want to make sure people hear this because it's incredible.
Yeah, it's I mean, from the time you're a young 11 bang bang or an infantry officer, everybody knows you have to go through a crucible, right? And Ranger School is not a leadership school.
Yeah.
It's a small unit tactics school, and you're not going there to earn the tab. That's not the whole point of it, right? It's a patch. You can go down to Commandos or Ranger Joe's and buy it, if you so want to do that. It's more than that. When I was platoon leader in IOBC before I went to Ranger School, we had a 75th Ranger Regiment legend. I won't say his name, but he came out and he was talking to our platoon, and everybody was humping his leg. Like, oh, how can I pass Ranger School? What can I do this? Which phase is the hardest? And I could tell it was irritating him, and I was just being an active listener in the back. I'm 6'8", so I'm either stand in the front or stand in the back. And I was like, I don't want to bug this man. This guy's a legend, and he's probably really annoyed with these kind of conversations. And he goes, "Let me stop you there, guys," or lieutenants. He goes, "Let me just stop you right there." He goes, "You're either a ranger or you're not. You just go to the school to validate." And I was like, that hit me. I was like, that was on point. So when I got my chance to go to Ranger School, you had all those years of fear kind of beat into you. It was institutionalized, right? You hadn't even been to the school yet, but in some ways you were afraid of the unknown, but you knew you had to have some intestinal fortitude and courage, and be willing to show up, at 03 in the morning, sit on your duffel bags in the parking lot, and then in your PTs, and then when it was go time, it was go time. And I remember going into that big circular pit next to the Malvesti obstacle course to do my push-ups, and I'd been practicing hard. I had my dog. I cut the cord on my dog tags and got it really short. So, I got long arms. So when I did push-ups, my nose was like going deep into that bark. I think my nose was like bleeding by the time I finished my 42. And when the RI didn't count, so he was doing those mind games. He didn't count your push-ups. So you're just there. You're just trying to do perfect, precise execution of that exercise. And when he said, "Get up, Ranger, you're done," the minute I stood up, popped to the position of attention, and walked out of that pit, going back to the end of the line, getting ready for sit-ups, I was like, I got this school. I got this school in the bag. I had broken that threshold of fear that had kind of been institutionalized. I was like, this is just a school. You've done all this before, Michael. You've been a senior patrol leader for a Boy Scout troop, leading them on a 75-mile backpacking trip from Western Washington at Diablo Lake across the Cascades and in the Eastern Washington Lake Chelan. You've done all this before. You carry heavy stuff. You know what servant leadership is. You know what the 11 points of leadership are. You're tactically proficient, because I had all that experience as a platoon leader, an XO, an S4. I came in very prepared. So I charged through that. A lot of it was, hey, give me the 240. Do the hardest stuff. I went in at 280 pounds and I graduated 64 days later on January 28th, my class, at 196. That's a lot of weight to lose. So my body just like consumed itself, but my mind.
You're 6'8" too, so I want to make sure people can kind of like picture that. I weigh 190 pounds right now, and I'm 6 foot.
Yeah, so I came out as you. I started as Brabs, and I came out as Josh. That's a lot to lose, right? But I wasn't hungry, right? I don't think I got hungry until mountain. Like we left mountain phase and we're heading to Florida. That's when my body was like, all right, dude, you need to eat some calories. Looking over at my, I love the BAT boys, the Ranger Battalion boys. Like I helped them write all of their op orders. I did 8 patrols, had 8 goes. I think, you can go check my green cards. I want to do that before I retire, by the way. Just go back and read what the NCOs that were my RIs that walked the lanes, what they wrote about me. And at the end of the course, I had one minor minus, and that was in mountain phase. I was the 240 gunner, and we had a horrific movement that night. I think everybody in leadership position got a no-go. And that night in the patrol base, they were like everybody in leadership position, get in here. And I looked at my ammo bearer and my assistant gunner, and I was like, I was the first lieutenant. I was like, guys, do I need to go into the middle as like the 240 gunner? And they were their eyes were rolling in the back of their head. And so I stupidly walked in the middle of the patrol base, and the RI's like, hey, everybody, that was a horrible movement. You're all getting minor minuses. And I raised my hand and I was like, I'm the 240 gunner. And he goes, you're still a leader. And I was like, roger that. I went up, and signed my minor minus, took it. So when I got to the end in Florida phase, we were on the, we were on the trucks heading back, and I'm sitting in the back. The whole platoon's just zonked out because they're just physically and emotionally like dead at that point, right? They're all emaciated. It's like someone had just liberated a prisoner of war camp, right? And I'm sitting in the back, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, just looking back at the dust behind the deuce and a half as we head back to 6th RTB, and the RI sitting across from me. He's like, "So what'd you think of school? Roster number triple deuce, Ranger Brabner." And I'm going to kind of miss it, Sergeant. He goes, you're going to be the officer honor graduate, right? And I was like, "No, Sergeant, I didn't know that." And he goes, "It's been an honor to walk lanes with you, and see your platoon." He goes, "It's one of the best classes, I've ever had the luxury or honor to be a Ranger instructor in." And I thought that was pretty cool. And fast forward, he ended up being one of my platoon sergeants in Afghanistan.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but long story short, standing there at Victory Pond, graduating on December 28th, which just happened to be my scoutmaster's birthday, and I told you he was a 75th Ranger Regiment guy. That was the best present I could ever give to him, was graduating from a school that he cherished, loves very deeply to this day, and not only graduate on his birthday, but be the Ralph Puckett Officer Honor Graduate. And man, I was so excited. I was like, Ralph Puckett's a legend. So my class, graduating class, was the first class that he stopped coming out and personally presenting the award to the Officer Honor Graduate. So I was kind of bummed that I didn't get to meet him. And then, I graduated, got in my car, and my wife and I had to beat feet really fast to Fort Campbell and the birth of our daughter 2 weeks later, and then say goodbye to them and go to Baghdad to join 175 Cav and 2nd Brigade. And long story short, a couple of years ago, this would be late 2022, one of my best friends, Chuck Kogel, who did a lot of time in a Ranger Reconnaissance Company almost his entire career, he was getting ready to retire, and his wife came up to me and was like, like the one thing he never got in his career was the Order of St. Maurice. I was like, "Are you serious? Entire time in regiment, and like you never got that?" And he goes, "No, it kind of sticks with him." And I was like, "Well, I'm a member of the National Infantry Association. I'll do a write-up right now. Can you get me his DD 214?" And I wrote him up, put him in for the award. So when we did his retirement ceremony at the Ranger Memorial, his wife, Joanne Kogel, she's a councilwoman down in Columbus, Georgia, coordinated for Ralph Puckett to come out, and we surprised Chuck. Mr. Colonel Puckett showed up, came out, and he read the citation for Chuck Kogel there at the Ranger Memorial, and I finally got to meet Ralph Puckett. So it was really cool, and we sat down and had a long conversation, and just a wealth of wisdom kind of man. And he shook our hands, and he goes, "I'm sorry I wasn't at your graduation," because we sat there and talked, and I told him the story, and he gave me one of his challenge coins, one of his personalized Medal of Honor challenge coins, and now I got that paired up, with my plaque. And that's, of all the things I've gotten across 25 years of service, to include my company colors, that's up there. And it just goes to show, at the time and the moment, you can't be selfish. Other people have needs. Other leaders have needs. They're on their own path in life, but eventually your paths will cross, and it'll all come together. You got to have faith. You got to stay the course. You got to be a believer. And good things happen to good people. And I was just very fortunate to be in those positions. And it was a really formative part of my career. And I know it's just a school, but it holds deeper meaning for me, because when you look at somebody that has one or doesn't, they either have it or they got a story, right?
Yeah, it's an instant barometer of what type of person they are.
Yeah, you need to do it. And, as a new platoon leader, you don't have the tactical experience. At the time you and I went through, that was in the midst of the global war on terrorism, right? So how dare you say you don't need it, or you're better than that? Because are you better than your men that you're going to be leading? You need to go through something.
I kind of think of it like this, like Ranger School, is it going to make you a better leader? Possibly, right? Is it going to make you a harder individual? Yes, because you can learn what your limits are and then how to lead people when they're at that limit. But one of the things that it's the standard. It is the bare minimum standard to be a rifle infantry platoon leader and a company commander. If you want to do that, you have to mentally prepare yourself that you're going to have to go spend at a minimum 60 days, sometimes more than that, in this
Yeah.
school, and it's a marathon. It's not a sprint, and it's mentally and physically challenging, but it is the minimum standard. We expect this of you if you want to be a leader in the infantry.
Yeah, 100%. And one thing I say to myself, um, and even in my family, right? My family, we all have our priorities at work,
Yeah.
and every day, kind of our motto, and I take this to work too, is part of the Ranger Creed: do more than your fair share of the task. If
Mm,
everybody does that, if everybody's chopping wood, you will have a bonfire to sit next to, and life will be good. But if people are slacking, they're not pulling their weight, um, then life's not fair.
yeah.
Life becomes harder. But if you're on a team, a family unit is a team. In Robotics Requirements Division, Air Branch, that is my team, and I'm a part of it. So if my guys, John Dudas and Brian Reed, if they're looking at me and I'm not pulling my weight, and I'm looking at them, they're not pulling their weight. It goes back to that accountability piece,
Yeah.
and that's something very unique in the military, that we will uh, always have and carry with us. And I think that's why we are different when we go back into the civilian community, because we look at mission success. We
Yeah.
look to we are inspired by having a vision. We want to be part of a transformational process. We want to be part of a democratic process, but we want to go places where
Mm.
there are people who are visionaries and are setting out to do the hard thing, the hard right over the easy wrong. That's we're cut from a different cloth.
When you transitioned out of the infantry into where we're at now as like an acquisition officer, walk me through that. How was that decision? When did you do it? How did you find out about it?
So I was on the North Shore, um, surfing, and my acquisition mentor, Chaz
I
Bowser.
want to picture 6'8" Brabs surfing in
Yeah.
Hawaii.
Hey, so I'm not a shortboarder, right? Shortboarding isn't cool, man. They're reef huggers, right? Longboards, nothing shorter than 10 feet. Custom board, so you don't surf, Taiwanese pop outs. You don't surf plastic. So a custom Volon glass, single fin, big wave gun or longboard. I was out there on the North Shore, and I did a lot of thinking, pre and post Afghanistan up there on the North Shore with my, who I didn't know at the time, one of my best friends to this day, Chaz Bowser. And he's
Mm,
like, "Hey, Brabs, have you thought about acquisition? What are you going to do after company command?" And I was like, I really don't want to be a Battalion S3 or battalion commander. Like, I really only joined the infantry to be a platoon leader. And then, at the time when the day I took the guide on, I got my 10-year letter. It said, your service obligation is fulfilled. The day I took the guide on, with my first sergeant Statmuller, John Statmuller, great guy. I could have walked away then, and I'm glad I didn't. But I didn't really see myself doing anything in the infantry or the army, for that matter, at my 10-year mark of
yeah.
rifle company command. But I'm glad I did it. It was 26 months of some of the best months of my life, with Charlie Company, Comanche Company, in Schofield Barracks, in Afghanistan, and I'm still friends with a lot of those guys today. Master Sergeant Stephen McElroy, CW3, Eric Scarf down flying Apaches at Fort Stewart. I didn't know what acquisition was, and Chaz, my mentor, he told me, he's like, "Look, man," he goes, "you could be the best ranger, you could be the best rifleman, and you can kill bad guys. But," he goes, "if you go into acquisition and you work material development, and you work on a weapon system, you work on a munition, you work on now a robotic small UAS system," he goes, "you help create that system and field good material solutions to the
Yeah.
warfighter." He goes, "You'll be like Kalashnikov." He goes, "You can kill a lot of bad guys." And a lot of people don't look at acquisition that way. So, he taught me early on. He's like, if you want to solve a problem in material development, look at the combat scenario. Look at what you want to neutralize, defeat, or destroy, and then backwards engineer to the solution. Don't predetermine that solution, backwards engineer from the solution or the
Yeah.
desired effect. So I was like, wow, it really stuck with me. So I came in acquisition, and I'll be honest with you, I went to the acquisition basic course in Huntsville, Alabama, and I really felt like I had betrayed my heart and soul. I was
Yeah.
looking to my left and right. I was one of only two infantrymen, no, three infantrymen in my little small group in that 2014 acquisition basic course. And then I got to my first assignment, and it was a culture shock. I
Yeah.
wasn't surrounded by meat eaters anymore. I was, a lot of leaf eaters, but good leaf eaters, experts in their field, system engineers, quality assurance. Um, and then I started making friends, and I started reaching out to DevCom Armament Center and making friends with guys like Russ Labar, who helped us design the Audible um, lethal mod mission payload that we now have written into requirements. I made friends with Michael George, a bunch of other people across the depth and breadth at Picatinny Arsenal. And then I was kind of in it, right? And then I was looking at like, okay, well, what do I want to do in acquisition? I knew in the acquisition basic course that I did not want to be a CSL product manager. I knew from
Yeah.
day one. I was like, that's not who I am. I don't want that. I don't want that life, to quote Varsity Blues. So I just went out and started taking assignments, and they were some of the least sexy assignments to acquisition officers. And one of my hardest things against acquisition officers is a lot of times we can be selfish. We are seen
Yeah.
as selfish for some of the things we are given the opportunity to do, like advanced civil schooling, training with industry. Whether you're a 51 Alpha or a 51 Charlie contractor. Um, some acquisition officers, I think, lack intestinal fortitude, and then
Yep.
some acquisition officers have egregious amounts of intestinal fortitude. I think of now Colonel Promotable Gibbs, who's PM SWAR. That guy's a meat eater. He's going to go places. He's a change agent. And I've had some acquisition officers that I'm like, good Lord, you are smart. You have an MBA. You have all these degrees, but good Lord, you don't have a tactical ounce of of knowledge like in your meat computer between your ears. So one of my downfalls as a leader is I'm extremely hard on people in terms of I expect you to chop wood, and when I don't see that, you kind of lose my trust and faith
Yeah.
and willingness for me to follow you. But I mean, good Lord, if you're a meat eater and you're willing to get after it, like Colonel Daniel Medallia up at PMUAS, and
Yeah.
Mr. Ed Gosder and Kevin Luman, and, Major Chris Simpkins up there that I work with a lot, or Major Morgan Keffer at PM SWAR, working Soldierborne Sensor. Like, they're meat eaters. They're contagious, and they want to be part of like that winning team. So um, yeah, having done everything in the acquisition lifecycle across the full model, all those jobs, you get to a point you have to develop that depth and breadth. And for me, it was doing the one thing that acquisition officers look down upon, but it's the one thing they all need, right? Alpha and Omega. Everything begins with a requirement.
Yeah.
So I know you're going to be a future, CSL product manager, program manager. Who knows? You may be really high up in ASALT before your career ends with your tenacity and willingness to get after it. But I was like, I really fell in love with requirements at Fort Sill, learning under Gary Lemons and Requirements Development Directorate. And I was like, this is where it began. So you call a product manager, the first thing they're going to say is, what's the requirement? What are the thresholds? And then they're going to go establish their acquisition performance baseline. They're going to develop their ACT strategy, but you have to be able to hand them a requirement. And so I
Yep.
came into this job as an acquisition officer or program manager, but with an operational love for the infantry, for maneuver, and not just maneuver, sustainment, support, intelligence, cyber, all the domains, right? I came into it with a love and a passion and said, I'm going to make requirements. We're going to do requirements. And I think we are the best Cape Dev team in the United States Army right now. And we're doing work at a joint level. So we got the Air Force knocking on our door. We got the Marine Corps. We have the Navy. Now we have the Coast Guard knocking on our door saying, hey, will you share your requirements with us? And I'm like, it's that humility piece, right? I'm like, absolutely, 100%. Give me your dot mil. It's coming to you hot. So you got to be part of something bigger than yourself or your team. So I think we're affecting change in that capacity. And I think that's about all I have to say about Army acquisition.
I think it comes down like deeds, not words. I always go back to this quote when I was doing a live fire exercise he was in the unit, I guess, if that makes sense, but he came down to the big army to do battalion command. And we were going through a live fire exercise at Fort Polk with my company. It was midnight. It was kind of raining a little bit. It was right on the borderline of freezing. The guys were pretty tired. We've done several iterations at that point. It's a final platoon that was going through theirs. And I mean, lack of a better term and not being politically correct, right? They sucked. It was a bad live fire. And me, I've always had a big heart, right? Like, especially when I lead with people, like I tend to be, unless there's life, limb, or eyesight issues, right? Like I tend to be a little bit more forgiving. And I was like, all right, we'll pick up tomorrow morning. And he looks at me as he does his final AAR and he says, deeds, not words, Josh. And he walks away. And that always has stuck with me. And I think like what you talked through, like, and I agree with you. I've worked with Colonel Medallia, Chris Simpkins. He took over my position as the
Mhm.
SRR. I really wish I could have had a better rip with him, but I knew he was going to crush it. We're going to work together next in the Pentagon, so that'd be interesting to kind of work beside him. But there's two types of acquisition officers. And I personally believe this. I think that there are ones who get into the field because they're selfish and they know that it's going to set them up for success in the civilian world, and that's their end state. And then there are those like you that are selfless. They choose that position because they believe they could be a disruptive change agent and actually benefit the warfighter, which I, I hate the term warfighter. I don't know why. It just doesn't stick well with me, but we need more people like you that can marry experience with acumen, if that makes sense, right? Like you have tactical experience being a maneuver company commander, seek forth and destroying the enemy, right? We need people that aligned in that, especially nowadays with all the disruptive technology that's coming out. And I think this is a perfect place to kind of go into that, like how robotics is shaping the battlefield. If we're looking at like the FLOT, the forward line of troops in future warfare, it's going to be like Terminator, robots fighting robots. Like I legitimately believe that. And we can see in like Ukraine right now with the disruptive behavior of technology and the speed of war of which it is growing and iterating. I think it's kind of really changing the acquisition model from how requirements are generated before. And I think a good is a Raven, right? We'll just use a Raven as a model. A requirements generated for this system. It is then going through a 3 to 5 to sometimes a 7 year material developmental solution. It is filled it and then sustained for 20 years. That model is garbage, I think, for us at least. It cannot be used because Moore's law, right? But now it's even doubled.
Mhm.
Technology is going to double maybe in 6 months, maybe in 3 months because of how much iteration that we're doing right now. So, how can we adapt requirements to iteratively change and continue to give capability to our warfighters so our sons and daughters, and I know you and I share this because now I'm like, you got me fired up, is that they're the greatest assets that this country has. I want my son, if he joins the military, to have the best technology possible. So if he has to meet someone else on the battlefield, he has that overwhelming, decisive power to come home. And then also, too, strength through power. I really believe that. Like, if we have the capability, it doesn't necessarily mean we need to use it, but when we do use it, it's going to work and it's going to be devastating. So, I think this is a great place to talk about like the what you're currently doing right now in the robotics space.
Yeah. So when Rob Ryan hired me July 1st, 2022, that's when I started this job. At the time, all service branches were working on the Joint Small UAS Capabilities Development Document. And coming in as an experienced acquisition officer, I knew what that meant. I saw the possibilities. And last night, preparing for this podcast, just really doing a, you know, introspective deep dive on myself and just asking myself, like, hey, what does leadership mean to you, Brabs?
Yeah.
Doing those rehearsals, right? So I didn't come on here and look like an ass clown. So all the digital universe, think about your words. I said, hey Google, what is considered to be the most difficult leadership challenge? And I'll read it to you right now. It said, according to many leadership experts, managing significant change is often considered the most difficult leadership challenge, as it involves Sorry, did you hear that? Our Google Home went off.
Oh yeah,
sorry.
but dude,
Yeah,
no,
I'll start it over again. Yeah, my son just went over there. Thanks, Luke. According to many leadership experts, managing significant change is often considered to be the most difficult leadership challenge, as it involves navigating resistance from employees, adapting to new situations, and effectively communicating the change process to achieve positive outcomes. And I read that and I was like, holy shit, that is the essence of what we've been doing the last 2.5 years in Robotics Requirements Division, and on the Air Branch team, at a joint level across a variety of key stakeholders, to include, the 75th Range Regiment, our Army capability managers, for our formations, infantry, reconnaissance, striker, ABCT. That's what we're doing here. We're going to be that change agent, and it's been difficult at times, but in the face of adversity, what do? Face everything and rise, right? Fear. And we set out to do that. We did it with lethality, because at the time, a lot of people don't know this, but Maneuver Center of Excellence is not the proponent for UAS. It's Aviation Center of Excellence.
Yep.
So I had to go down to the UAS summit at Fort Novosel, and I had to join their team. I had to bend the knee and kiss the ring, right? To quote, kind of Lord of the Rings or the Rings of Power. I'm sorry. No, that was a wrong pop culture reference. It's the other one. I'm drawing a blank right now. Where is it with Khaleesi and the dragons? That's
Game of Thrones.
Game of Thrones. Yeah, you got to bend the knee and kiss the ring, right? Otherwise, you get scorched by the dragon. I had to go down to Fort Novosel and team with Colonel Nicholas Ryan and his deputy Patrick O'Brien, and now Colonel Ruiz Sanchez and Tyler Booth. Had to team with them and say, hey, you're our proponent. This is what we want to do. This is everything the Raven wasn't. This is everything our formations, maneuver formations, want this system to be. Build organic assets that the ground force commander, whether you're a squad leader, company commander, platoon leader, or battalion commander, can use when air goes black. You don't have fixed wing, you don't have rotary wing in that firefight, you don't have ISR platforms because clouds have rolled into the Hindu Kush mountains of RC-East. What can I do? How can I use a robotic system for robotic enabled maneuver to make contact with the enemy, maintain contact, and then not only find them but fix them and destroy them. And that's really the essence of what we're doing with the Joint SWAT CD and our family of systems. Is we are making what I think will be very good material solutions that the warfighter will want to use. And because we are change agents, and it goes back to my comments about not only being an acquisition officer, but doing the JCIDS process and writing good requirements, and putting in there precedent changing language. You talk about things in legal precedents. We just got in 2023, summer of 2023, we got the Joint SWAS CDD approved by Admiral Joyner, leading the JROC. We just got long range reconnaissance, that annex to the Joint SWAS CDD, approved by General George, and it's now going up to Admiral Joyner at the JROC for approval. We put language in there that challenged the culture. And, Socrates always said, the secret to change is to focus all your energy, not on fighting the old, but building the new. And that's what we're doing. We're making that new, as my friend James Hamblin at Army Special Operations Requirements Directorate says. We're making that new, right? We're chopping wood. And we put language in there that got us out of the status quo of the 2013 capabilities production document that gave us the Raven. It gave us SRR Tranche 1, 2013, and we're sitting in 2025, and that's still a document. So I'm in the process. As soon as we get next gen short range reconnaissance written, we will take that out in the backyard like Old Yeller, and we'll put a bullet in it. It's being put down. the 2017 capabilities production document for soldier-borne sensor. We are writing the next gen soldier-borne sensor annex to the Joint SWAT CDD, and we'll old yeller that one too. And then we will have ownership at the Maneuver Center of Excellence for Group 1 and Group 2. That's huge. And then all
That's
the
awesome.
modular mission, all the modular mission capabilities, all the modular mission payload capabilities that come along with that. EOIR sensing, comms extension, network relay, electronic warfare plus, and I'll just leave it there. There's a plus next to it for a reason.
Yeah.
And last but not least, my favorite, lethality. And you were there when we started doing Audible on, we did our first Audible drop December 5th, 2022. Yeah. And I posted about this last night on LinkedIn. All the haters, they were on your team. They were on my team at the Maneuver Center of Excellence.
Yep.
All the haters. And I'll just leave it at that. Like eat crow because we changed things.
I will never forget. I had a senior leader in my organization. He was basically talking, I think, at like a Pathfinder event, AUSA, something like that. And he was like, "Hey," and I think it was Colonel Ryan at the same time too. They went back and forth. They're like, "Well, our soldiers don't need kinetic capability on Group 1 drones. Who are you to say that?" Like, right? Like, look at what China is doing right now. They have embedded FPV pilots in their formation, and they have also developed and invested billions of dollars. And then they kind of like frame it to make it a little bit more personal for us. We do not have any fully NDAA compliant Section 848 out of the 2020 FPV systems. Like, as a country, the US does not have that. And why is that important? Is that is a huge combat multiplier for maneuver formations, because it allows you to find, fix, and destroy exactly what you said, but then it enhances that kill chain, like the SBS, the SRR, MRR, LRR, layering those assets so we have a disruptive advantage on the battlefield. Like, so I can find you, I know where you are, and then I'll choose how to kill you, and lack of a better term, because I have the tools at my disposal to best end you. That's awesome.
100%, man. It's like operational terms and graphics, right? It's your MCoE. So you take what you learn operationally, you take what you learn as a program manager from acquisition, and you have a series of overlays. And one of the things I always like to do in acquisition or an approach model is minimize the number of complex components, maximize the number of common components. And that's at the core of what we're doing for the Joint SWAS CDD and family of systems, is that modular mission payload, that modularity to be able to use things across the hunter-killer spectrum. And that's why we've nested so well with low altitude stalk and strike, why we've entrenched ourselves with the aviation community, and Brigadier General Kane Baker at Future Vertical Lift, and Colonel Nick Ryan and Colonel Ruiz Sanchez down at Aviation Center of Excellence. With what they're doing, with regard to launched effects. When you think about it, when you look at the sheer quantities, the basis of issue plan for joint SWAS, and I'm just going to talk about the Army. It's a joint document. So when you get the Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard, when they have these systems in mass, you will be able to concentrate that mass with what will be the largest Air Force per capita in the world. So everybody likes to talk about Russia, Ukraine, and China, but you take our war fighters, and I know you hate that term, steely-eyed killers. I'll use that one.
Yeah.
When you take like all those gals and girls out there across the joint service branches in the Army specifically, and you arm them with small UAS that are highly capable multi-tools flying in the sky. Like, if you fly, we fly, you die. You take that, I think it's on par with things, revolution in military affairs, like the advent of gunpowder. Nuclear capabilities, the fear that brings, and how we're seeing things unfold on the battlefield right now. And thank God we're on the bench, right? Everybody else watched us in the GWAT, and they learned our hard lessons free. We're learning hard lessons free right now, but we're not stupid. We're taking all that open and closed source intelligence. We are putting it into our emerging requirements documents, and we will give our fighting force the best systems. And it goes back to that language, right? We've established precedent. Precedent was set with the long range reconnaissance annex. These systems shall be updated every 36 months or as needed based on technology maturation. So it's kind of like the Abrams
Mm.
engineering change proposal model, how they were able to climb the ladder in terms of capability with their system enhancement, program efforts to go from a M1A1 SEP B1 to a SEP B3. All those capabilities. We need to do the same thing with small UAS. It needs to follow an evolutionary growth curve, and we cannot have a requirement document that's over 10 plus years old with
Yep.
those really lazy acquisition lifecycle models that show like a shadow going out to like 2050.
Yeah.
That dog doesn't hunt, right? So
Nope.
um, a large portion of the accountability lies on your capability developers, your requirements writers. Everybody likes to say, the operational force likes to say acquisition officers are jacked up. They don't know what we want, they don't know what we need. But acquisition officers will say, "What's the requirement say? I'm only chartered to build the threshold."
Yeah.
So that's why we put that change language in our documents, so we establish a new precedent. Going back to the Raven, Army senior leaders were like, "You and I both faced it. The Raven's too expensive. If you lose it, Josh, you could be fired. You could face, financial penalties. Soldiers didn't want to fly it because they didn't want to, have their pay cut or, be under a 15-6 investigation because they weren't trained properly or they hit a crosswind and flew 30 miles into Pakistan.
Yeah.
You had to change that. So we put language in that document that said these systems will be ACE compliant. Everybody hears modular open systems approach or architecture. We said these systems will be ACE compliant, and that's attritable, consumable, expendable.
Mm.
It's a tool no different than any other tool we have on the battlefield. Like nobody bats an eye when a helicopter fires a Hellfire. Nobody bats
Yeah.
an eye when we shoot a TOW or a Javelin. Nobody bats an eye when you fire 90 rounds of 60 millimeter mortars in a firefight on the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. But everyone bats an eye when you try to fly a Raven to gain decision advantage over your enemy and something happens. It's like a safety on a weapon. It's a mechanical device that can and will fail. And leaders have to dial back the accountability through risk mitigation and make sure their soldiers across the dot mil PFP spectrum, the T, are trained to employ and use that
Mm.
tool. Because my boss, Dom Edwards, says this, and I love it. He says, what robots do are moderately interesting. Moderately interesting. It's like the stocking stuffer Radio Shack, little quadcopter that took like a AA battery that you got on Christmas morning and it broke or the dog ate it within like 30 minutes, right, of you getting
Yep.
it. And then you just push it off to the side. That's kind of the Raven mentality. That's what we did as an Army for the last 25 years. Now you have to say the compelling piece of robotics are the effects that they give us, and that's decision
Mhm.
advantage, the ability to make contact, maintain contact, and then have modularity in your payloads to exercise a hunter-killer model organically, not calling for someone else to come send it to you because 9 times out of 10, you're probably not going to get it, right? But organically have those solutions, those tools to employ on a battlefield. And going back to the gunpowder, nuclear warfare, naval air power, air force, air power, air domination. Um, I would not want to face an army or a joint force, the UK, Canada, the United States,
The Five
Australia, New
Eyes.
Zealand, the Five Eyes. I would not want to face a combined allied force that had mastered robotic enabled maneuver. It will
Yeah.
be the scariest thing out there. And we know this for a fact based on what we're seeing in Ukraine and Russia and what we're
Yeah.
watching China do. Um, that's fact. It is, you go from how we've fought in the infantry, it has not changed much in the last 200 years.
Yep.
Robotic enabled maneuver will be that leap forward.
Mhm.
That'll be that next plateau that we ascend to. And if we master it, if our leaders embrace it and are change agents, and more importantly, the most important thing that people forget, the training piece, you have to invest in training your operators,
Yep.
advancing and supporting changes in the force structure to have robotic and autonomous system formations. HMI, what we're doing with tick brigades. We have leaders right now that are being change agents, and change is coming. And I'm glad to be a part of that that change, but it's chopping wood. We're chopping wood to arm those acquisition professionals, our program managers, our contractors, to go out and get the best material solution, because we are going to regenerate our requirements in a way that arms them with the documents they need to go do the SPAR and the POM cycle, and work with the Hill and the Pentagon, to get the needed appropriations and
Yeah.
obligations of funds to execute these programs. It's a coalition of the willing, and we've been building it for the last 2.5 years. And I will be extremely proud to see whoever takes the guide on from me as the Air Branch Chief, coming up here in the next 7 months, 5 days, and continues to run with scissors.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll do everything in my power too to make sure they're successful. Even though I'm transitioning up to the building, I'm
Yeah,
still going to try to keep my pulse on it. And there's one thing that I think you hit the nail on the head that we have to begin to like change our mindsets around. It's risk tolerance. And with UAS specifically, and that's a broad category, right? I think robotics specifically, like ground, group 1, group 2, group 3, all the way up, we need to change how we view those systems, and then we have to become more risk tolerant. I think that's one of the hardest things that I've had to work with engineers. They want to take all of the risk out, 100% of the risk out, and then we as maneuver, background infantry guys, we're okay with having a healthy level of risk because we will continue to mitigate it as we continue to move forward, but we don't necessarily allow risk to drive our decisions. We understand what they are and we'll make the best informed decisions at the time. I think we're at this inverse point as a military specifically, because we have all this disruptive technology. The easy answer is, well, we can't move as fast because we don't truly know it yet. And because we don't know it, it's just too risky versus we need this. We need it now because we don't know what the next year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years looks like. We need to begin to get this in our formations. We need to start organizing. We need to start training. We need to make sure they have the right material solutions, that we have the supply chains all the way down to the course material of where it's coming from set. So if anything were to happen again, and that's not our goal, we don't want it to happen, but if it were to happen, then we will be in the position to be successful. And I think that's going to be the next challenge with a lot of like the senior leaders. And one of, I see is that how do we change that culture of risk and acquisitions? It's NASA and SpaceX. I think that's a perfect example looking at it. Like Elon Musk's way of managing risk and just making decisions on the fly, of where NASA would never launch a rocket if there was any possibility that it would fail. But SpaceX is catching gigantic rockets with freaking sticks like that. That's phenomenal, and it's so
yeah,
simple at the same time. But yeah, I 100% agree with you, and I'd love to kind of get into the FPV annex that's
yeah,
getting ready to get released. When is that? Because I'm super pumped about it.
yeah.
And if you could walk me through FPV too, because I know one thing about you is that you not only do the requirements, you also have your robotics van that you like to go drive around and fly this as a hobby, which is awesome.
Yeah. Um, so it's internationally known as first person view, right? But we adopted USASOC's naming convention, um, because we're capability developers, we're material developers. And
Yeah.
our new name for FPV is purpose built attritable system. So just in the
Uh-huh.
name alone, you got purpose built. That applies to modular mission payloads like the Common Lethality Integration Kit that DEVCOM Armament Center is working to transition to Colonel Vince Morris, program manager for close combat systems, PMCCS up there at Picatinny. Um, so purpose built, a tritable system. It goes back to that language in the document of allowing leaders to not be afraid to use the system, because the effects, the return
Mm,
on investment that you will achieve at the small unit tactical level with that system, when
yeah.
augmented and hyper enabled by other systems in the Joint SWAS family of systems, and then also groups 3, 4, 5, our aviation brothers and sisters down at Novacell, the systems that they're developing and building out, with future vertical lift, cross-functional team. It's going to be a scalpel. And one of the most alluring things about
Mhm.
purpose-built attritable systems is the low cost.
Yep.
And then,
That's critical.
NDA compliance, and then lethality. You got folks like Brian Davis out there and Kraken Kinetics that are
Yep.
that are
They're crushing it.
really they are crushing it. They're change agents. And I was having this discussion last night on LinkedIn. I was watching some folks go back and forth in a thread, just being really harsh on each other. And even Bob Sakaki says it a lot. It's going to take a coalition of the willing as we stand up the industrial base and we empower them with
Yep.
these requirements to push capability, to drive capability development, not to push it, to drive it. They're going to be the backbone of this entire effort. So you got a lot of people looking at the FPV space, or now the PBAS space, and the wealth of opportunity and benefits that are going to be shared by all from that system. And our warfighters want it too.
Yeah.
Had a lot of Army senior leaders over the last 2.5 years that were staunch opponents to FPV. Like, oh, we're not going to fight it like the Ukrainians are going to fight it. Like, yeah, you're damn right. We're not going to fight it like the Ukrainians are going to fight it. We're going to fight it differently. It's going to be, used across a network of other highly capable systems to apply precision effects at the point and position on the battlefield at a time and place of our choosing. Not like the global
Yeah.
war on terrorism, where we all had to ride IED alleys every day.
Yep.
A time and place of the enemy's choosing. Guess what? We're flipping that paradigm. The coin just got flipped, right? So we're going to use these hyper-enabled robotic and autonomous systems to be used in a precision manner with very good effects, whether that's anti-personnel, anti-materiel on the battlefield, in conjunction with ISR modular mission payloads. So February 4th or 11th, I'd have to go look at the calendar. We are entering into Army-wide staffing. We got the call last week that they're like, "Hey, we want an FPV requirement." And I was like, okay, well, first off, it's called PBAS now. So Army, we
I
love our
need to make
acronyms,
sure I
right?
start using that term
Yeah,
correctly within the SOCOM space.
yeah, PBAS. And they said, "Hey, we need a requirement." And I said, "Hey, we just so happen to have one. It's 100% complete. It's ready for showtime." No one told us to do that work, Josh. You know this. When we started doing it a little over a
Yep.
year ago, with I was fortunate to have Captain Rob Woodings get assigned to my team. He was getting ready to ETS. He's up, he's at a very good business school right now. He's left the Army, but I handed it to him. I said, "Hey, you will go buy an FPV." I gave him some FPVs that were loaned to me by a friend up in the Fort Liberty area. And I said, "Go out and learn this right now. I want you to start chopping wood, write this annex." And people are like, "Why are you doing that? Like, you weren't told to do that." I was like, "Yeah, but it's coming. There will come a time and a place when an Army senior
All of
leader
that.
reaches down and says, 'I want this now.'" And if we had done that, we would have been 12 to 15, 18, almost 24 months behind the power curve. It costs the Army $0 except time, your most valuable resource, to write
100%.
requirements. And then when I can take that requirement and I can give it to Colonel Medallia, she's the happiest acquisition officer program manager in the world, because we are doing our job. So at every CDID across the Army, your capability developers need to be tased and motivated. It's that transactional leadership style, right?
Yeah.
That's what it takes. Is you have to jolt, you have to jump start the engine and get everybody rowing and chopping wood to do this. And that's what we did with PBAS. And we have a phenomenal requirement coming out, prepared to go into staffing, that is defendable, both from a modeling and simulation, ORSA math, right? Everything we do with regards to gaps is tied back to modeling and simulation. Well, I can tell you right now, it's been verified and validated. It is going to be an integral part of our joint small UAS CDD strategy. And I can't wait to see what our operators do with it. I was just out yesterday at the range watching some of the best FPV pilots in the Army from the 75th Ranger Regiment, building systems, flying systems, integrating systems on medium range reconnaissance material candidate solutions. Company PDW is out there with their C100, air dropping 5-inch FPVs with lethal mod mission payload tactical trainers that could then transition to tactical solutions, lethal non-mission payloads. So our men and women are out there doing it. But we just have to get the requirement document into Colonel Medalia's hands so she can do the mat dev piece and turn it into something real. And then as requirements writers, we regenerate that requirement. We upgrade it based on technologically maturing solutions and enemy threat systems. So we outpace our enemies, and we maintain that doctrinal 3-to-1 ratio. You hear us use 10x down here in RRD at the Maneuver Center of Excellence in MCDID. We need to have that 10x capability, but it all starts with requirements. And PBAS is one I'm very proud to have our name on, and give to our program managers and see what they do with it, and then more so what our steely-eyed killers, and then use your least favorite word there, what they take the system and turn it into. When those leaders get a hold of it and they say, hey, this thing's attritable, consumable, expendable, it gives me decision advantage, time and place of my choosing. I can invest, I can train my operators, I can start formulating robotic and autonomous system experts, master trainers, 15 series UAS operators that'll really be looked at as master gunners now in the air, ground, littoral, and then get out there on the battlefield and kick the shit out of our enemies. That's the driving force. So yeah, you get me pretty excited talking about FPV, man. It's one near and dear to my heart, because I know it is, out of all the systems, it's one of the ones that warfighters want the most. Our innovation cells across the Army, SOCOM, USASOC, JSOC, they're doing this. They're leading the way. But we have to get that requirement document, because if we don't do that, we don't follow acquisition law, policy, and regulation and do the work, chop the wood, we can't do the other things, right? There is no easy button for this. There's no Radio Shack of drones. They have to be held accountable, and the accountability lies in the threshold and objectives in those documents that can and will change. We build a threshold, but eventually, as systems mature, those objectives become the new thresholds, and you establish new objectives, and you keep doing that. It's going to be cool to watch this evolve. Miss Kimberly Newton, she's the director of integration at Army at AFC. She's looking at this now as a vignette. I know a member of Elon Musk's transition team reached out to us and said, "Hey, how are you doing requirements?" And we showed them our playbook, and they're like, "Wow, this is transformational." Now with
that's awesome, dude.
Yeah, now with Pete Hegseth getting confirmed last night, we got a new SecDef. You heard in all his words, you even heard our new president talking about robotic and autonomous systems. I would love for them. I would love for them to get their hands on our operational view models at the macro and micro level, and then, hey, invest in us, believe in us, and then more so, let our warfighters go out and use this tool, train them to be scalpels on the battlefield at the two-way petting zoo, and unleash the beast, and then manage it, control it, and influence, and then upgrade it.
I think it kind of goes to something I've always used I call it Triple H, the rule of head, heart, hand. If I can explain it to you, head, you could at least understand it. Does it create that emotional response? And I think you got to actually go begin to do like a training. And then once you see it and you feel it, you have that intrinsic motivation, the ability to go do things, you're just going to go do them, right? Like, so I think like getting in with the transition team now, explaining it to them, bringing them out so they can start seeing the users, it'll build that intrinsic motivation, and it'll create that oh shit moment, right? Like, oh, we need to do this, because I can see all the naysayers right now is that it's going to cost too much. It's going to be too risky. It's too hard. I had the honor and the privilege to go through a UMS course a little time ago. Never flown a drone other than like an SRR, things that had a lot of autonomy stacks on them. Very easy to do, right? Like they basically fly themselves. But in the FPV space, a lot of it's like maxed visualization, meaning that you're pushing the drone to its peak performance. And there's really not a whole lot of autonomy necessarily in the current FPV space. So you have to be an expert pilot. 2 weeks long, building the drones up front. So I can build a drone now with no experience, and I learned that in 96 hours, which was arguably pretty easy. The soldering is the hardest part, but that's on the far end of spectrum, right? Like we're going to have vendors do that. And then we had 96 hours of going through a training course of where we started. And I'm telling you, like, I'm not even lying. I did a power loop 60 miles an hour down. I did not increase the throttle, and it went straight into the ground, kamikaze. But what blew me away is that the drone didn't break. The battery flew off, but I put it right back up and started flying again, and it was fine. And then that's when I realized, as a very humble Josh, I'm the best drone pilot and builder in the world, because I just made the robust drone in the world. But going to that standpoint is that, yeah, it is difficult, but if I can learn it with having no background at all in 96 hours and be able to fly through buildings and stairwells and stuff like that, anyone can do it, because I am just a humble Appalachian from rural West Virginia and an infantryman by trade, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed. And what you're doing now is going to be absolutely critical. And I love that. I appreciate it.
Yeah. One thing we've run into, and people that know me know I'm very articulate, sometimes verbose and graphic with my descriptions or metaphors and analogies. But
That's why I love you.
yeah, it kind of hit me when we were doing long range reconnaissance, and I was thinking back to the lessons learned with Raven. Right? Do you know how much? Do you know how much a rifle platoon costs? Think about that for a second. How much does a rifle platoon cost?
Mhm. Yeah, it
So
would
don't think
depend
about
on.
it. Don't think about it with your head and your heart. Think about it with analytics in terms of modeling and simulation, because everything's a war game, right? You gotta quantify it, right? It's
Yeah.
qualitative and it's very quantitative. War is about attrition. Let's
Mm.
just talk about soldiers group life insurance. I was watching Band of Brothers last night, and they were like, "Hey,
Mm.
make sure before they were doing the drop." My son was like, why is the light red, Dad?" I was like, "Because when it goes green, they're jumping out of that airplane." And Band of Brothers, the scene before they're loading up to cross the English Channel and do an airborne drop, behind the lines in Normandy. They're like, "Hey, everybody, make sure you go over and sign your soldiers group life insurance." Then it was $10,000. So now we're getting to quantitative analytics, right? Right
Mhm.
now, if you or me die, that's a $500,000 payout to our
Yep.
families if you've done the smart thing and you're paying your SGLI every month, right?
Yep.
So a rifle platoon with the numbers, 30, 30 man platoon, $15 million. So look back at Iraq and Afghanistan. How many times you lost a Raven, you sent a platoon out to go look for it.
Oh,
So
100%.
however much a Raven costs, like let's just say 256K, you're going to
Yep.
send $15 million just in terms of soldier group life insurance into a combat zone to look for a piece of equipment. It's stupid.
Mm.
And so when we were doing long range reconnaissance, we're like, well, what if it goes down? What are we going to do? It's like, who cares?
Yeah.
You lose a vehicle in combat. Let's say you lose a MATV in Afghanistan. You hit a deep buried HME IED. Not
Yeah.
only do you lose that MATV, you lose the Crow weapon system. You lose the
Mhm.
FPCB2. You lose every piece of equipment, to include the operators. It's a 5-man
Yeah.
vehicle, right? Gunner, TC, driver, and 2 dismounts. You lose everybody in that vehicle. Look at your return on investment with robotic and autonomous systems. So if I
Yep.
can fly a long range reconnaissance out, or I can take an FPV and I can hit a high priority target, what's the cumulative effects on return on investment? Everybody saw that Ukrainian FPV operator. I think he had something like 500 kills, and they started to quantify the return on investment that one man on the battlefield employing a PBAS system, what it added up to. Like he was
Yeah.
taking out SAM sites, he was taking out radars, he was taking out logistical supply trains, he was killing Russian soldiers.
Yep.
You start adding that up. Like, who cares if the FPV costs, with a full up system costs $1,500? The return on investment from that soldier employing that tool on the battlefield at the two-way petting zoo grossly exceeds what you pay for it MSRP
Yeah.
in terms of acquisition, like cost schedule performance, cost specifically. So you have to look at robotics in that way. And that's why we have attritable, consumable, expendable in there. It's like, hey, leaders, it's okay if you use this and you're using it wisely, your operators are trained. what's your return on investment? And that's really what we
Mm,
try to get people to focus on when they look at robotics. Is it is an investment. You can fly that investment out beyond the forward line of troops. So now you have a dynamic forward line of sensors. You have a 10x capability. You are creating decision advantage, and you are owning and dominating the most important piece of key terrain that exists, and that's the sky. And
mm,
organically, we haven't done that in the Army.
yep,
At a tactical maneuver echelon level, we always farm it out to somebody else. We got to phone a friend. Well, we're not
yep,
phoning friends anymore. Leaders will make the decision, get it in the sky, rotate it based on its performance envelope, battery or power consumption rates, what payloads it's carrying. Make a decision to use that tool in the best manner to give you decision advantage. And then
mm,
make a decision like, what you going to do, PL?
mm. You've made such, like we were talking about before, you're like a folk hero in a lot of like the Army space. What leadership styles did you apply to that, right? Like from all the experience that you've learned before, National Guard, moving up, crushing it through Ranger School, to rotations, Iraq, Afghanistan, all these things. What type of leadership did you have to adapt from leading steely-eyed killers? I like that term better in warfighter than to civilians, engineers, like these big, beautiful brains.
So you have to be eclectic. You have to be able to look into your internal display case and have a menagerie of leadership traits, qualities,
Mm,
and tools. So, and preparing for this last night, I was looking, I was doing a deep dive on all the different leadership styles, and I came to the conclusion, the realization. Um, Learned a little bit more about myself. It's like, hey, Brabs, you're not just one type style. That doesn't
yep,
define you. You have to be adaptive. There may be times when you have to be transactional, like you have to scuff somebody up. And I've done
yep,
that too. I'm very good at it. I don't like going high order, but sometimes it takes a thermobaric round to somebody's chest to snap them back into reality. If Mr. Bill Sandville, always said, he was deputy program manager at PM Maneuver Ammunition Systems. It always made him mad when people like draped themselves in the flag, or they would just use false narratives to
mhm,
justify their lack of give a damn, or their lack of willingness to chop wood and do hard
yeah,
work. So sometimes you got to be transactional, and people will make you mad. But then you go into being like I said earlier, a coach. Hey,
yep,
maybe Josh doesn't have the depth and breadth that I do. I got to coach you to get you up to my level. If your standard is lower, I need to coach you, and then also use like a democratic style of, hey, Josh, I think I got the answers, but I'm gonna exercise some humility here. How
mhm,
would you go about attacking this problem? So that's the democratic process. And then where I think a lot of leaders lack is in their vision. A vision should change and evolve as you achieve things. It's how many organizations have you been where you see the vision statement and it doesn't change for the entire time you're there?
yep,
It should change, right? It should
yep,
it should adapt. Your priorities and your mission will change based on the needs of your higher headquarters or what they want you to accomplish. So if you think you're just going to sit in a trench and your mission set isn't going to change, you're a damn fool. And you're also lazy. You're complacent.
yep.
Um, one thing
Complacency kills.
yeah, I hear a lot of this one's a lot. A lot of people hate the word servant leader. Um, I think it's a good thing.
Mhm,
2 years ago, I went through the adult wood badge course, which is like the Boy Scouts of America kind of. It's the adult leadership training thing, right? It's like the Ranger School of adult leadership and scouting. So yeah, I was a scout. I was an Eagle Scout. I learned leadership there, but to go back and exercise patience. It's like I was in the woods last week with my son's troop. It was 3 degrees in Blue Ridge Mountains, 3 degrees.
whew,
So how do you mitigate risk, right? So we found a property with a 2-story barn that we could have shelter, right?
mm,
We got 60 gallons of propane tanks. We bought space heaters, so we made a safe environment so they could go execute like their snow sports program. So it's the guiding It's the guiding force of leadership. So how do I protect my element, my subordinates, to enable them to do what they need to do, and that's grow, learn, adapt, fail often, fail
Yep.
early, be challenged. So that's why I love the Boy Scouts of America so much, is because it offers young men and women now the opportunity to learn leadership lessons. Like, you don't really get that sometimes in a sport. My daughter does shotgun. It's an individual sport. I did, I shot in high school, and I shot collegiately. It's an individual sport, but collectively,
Yeah.
it's considered a team sport. Are you on a football team? Are you the quarterback? Are you the team captain? Um, there's a lot of leadership roles layered into life, and the things we do. But in doing all of them, one size doesn't fit all.
Mm.
You have to learn. You look at special missions units and USASOC. And my favorite's the 75th Ranger Regiment, who I consider to be the standard bearers of the United States Army. Usually, if
Mm.
they're doing something, they are the change agents for the rest of the Army. Look
Yeah.
what they did with physical fitness. Look what they've done with small unit tactics. And then those leaders within that organization cycle back out into the operational force. There's many good ones out there, and then you have operational guys in the infantry and other branches that are doing things. They're adaptive, they're learning, and as I think one thing we're fortunate to do as Army leaders is we're never in one spot too long. I think over the course of those 25 years, I was moving like almost every 2 years. So you're getting thrust
Yep.
into a new environment, where you have to change and adapt based on that organization's mission, its culture, its people, its leaders, whether they be good or weak. And you have to learn. Like, I showed up at Fort Sill to be as an acquisition officer as my second assignment, in the acquisition corps. And when I got there, no joke, they asked me, they're like, "Why are you here?" And I was like, "What do you mean, why am I here?" And they're like, "Well, you're not an air defender and you're not a field artilleryman." And I thought about it and I said, "Yeah, but I'm an infantryman and I'm an acquisition
Mm.
officer." And I was like, at the crux of what I do is maneuver. And last time I checked, both of those branches work to support maneuver. That's why I'm here. And
Ooh, I love that.
yeah, Colonel Kelly Laughlin looked at me. He was the senior acquisition advisor at Fort Sill at the time when I arrived at FC did. And he said, "I'm going to make you the S&T advisor. It's a lieutenant colonel billet. I know you're just a major, but I'm going to put you in it." And so I had to punch above my weight class, right? And I had to learn quickly because I didn't know
Hmm.
air defense. I called for fire a lot in Afghanistan. Like, we rocked the hell out of those towed 777s, shooting charge 8. Not 9 times out of 10. So I knew a little bit more about field artillery, but I was weak sauce in air defense. And now look what we're doing with counter UAS and small
Yep.
UAS, and how that now layers into the macro level or operational view, and that architecture, that system of systems. So um, leaders rise to the occasion, and then losers always talk about their past. Winners go out and make new opportunities and are change agents. So um, even with Ranger School, I'm proud of what I did there, but no one cares,
Yeah.
and that's
What's
okay.
next?
It doesn't define you. It's like, what next? How do you take what you've learned and apply it to the next target set in life? Talk about that 25-meter target and how you hit it, but what are you doing to change and get out and touch that 300-meter target, and
Mm.
accurately touch that 300 target consistently, touch that 300-meter target and knock it down. So yeah.
What's beyond the uniform for you? So let's kind of get to that point. Like, you've served for almost 25 years, probably a little bit more than that when you get ready out. You've made a lot of disruptive change for the better for the Army, and you're leaving it a better place than what you probably took it as. What's next for you? Leadership beyond the uniform.
Well, um, finally at a point in my life where we own our house. We've set conditions. Everything I've done, I always have a backwards plan, right? It's like
Yep.
the acquisition framework I told you. It's like, find what you want to kill, neutralize, defeat, or destroy, and work back from that. I've had that. I've had that in my head since I enlisted, December of 2001. I always knew this day would come, and I gave you kind of the cancer diagnosis analogy. I got 7 months, 6 days, and like I'm really starting to feel that now.
Yeah.
But I'm also proud that we've been chopping wood, and as I hand this guide on or baton off, I feel confident that enough change is in motion now. Like there's a bow wave of change that's built up, that I can take the uniform off and then stay active in this space.
Yeah.
In 2001, when I enlisted, if you had told me like, "Hey, you're going to be doing robotic systems at the end of your career as an acquisition officer and an infantryman," I would have been like, "You're crazy, right?
Yep.
You can't see, you don't know what's coming." But to be here, to be next to Fort Benning, which is a place, I'm sorry, Fort Moore, um,
Yeah,
which is,
it's a tough challenge to
yeah,
pronounce the right way.
yeah, yeah. My mind isn't, when I think back in time, like, well, can I call it Benning because it was Benning at the time I was there, and now it's Moore. And General Moore was great, great man, and so was his wife. Um, so now that we're here at Fort Moore for the fifth time, we live up north of the base. It's a place near and dear to my heart. And just yesterday, I was out on a range, and I was like, "Holy cow!" And in the summer of you know 2002, I was out here on Sand Hill digging foxholes. I was out there, talking to Rob Ryan, and it kind of brought it all home. I was like, "Wow,
Yeah.
it's pretty cool, man." It's a walk down memory lane, and other guys that were out there still in uniform, and then out in uniform working for industry, demonstrating capabilities for the upcoming Army Expeditionary Warfighter experiment that we're getting ready to go deep into. They were all walking down memory lane too. So um, I'm at a place in my life where we actually hang pictures on the wall now because we know we're not moving in 18 months. So that's comforting. My family's settled. My kids have friends. We're part of a community. We're actively involved in scouting and the sports that they're doing, and working with local law enforcement up here in Harris County to try to teach them about small UAS,
Mm,
not in a tactical capacity, but extend that sphere of influence and take a skill
yeah.
set that you've learned and become intimately ingrained and intertwined with, and teach them, make them better as they serve and protect the community. That's something I look forward to. And then, I talked about having done every job across the acquisition lifecycle, from concept development, capability development, program management across milestones A, B, and C, science and technology, working with Army Futures Command, and now 5 cross-functional teams.
Mm,
Air and missile defense, long-range precision fires, future vertical lift, soldier lethality, cross-functional team, close combat lethality, cross-functional team. Taking that experience, operational test is a big one that a lot of acquisitions like shy away from because they're
yeah.
cowards. I don't want to go
Yeah.
to Fort Hood. I don't want to be a test officer. The OER profiles aren't there from leaders. It's like, hey man, quit being a coward. Like, why don't you go
Yep.
down there and take what you give back to one of those test directorates with your operational basic branch knowledge, and make them better. Test the stuff that our Cape devs and Mat devs are turning into material solutions. Go test it. Quit being a coward. Quit trying to hide out in PEOs for your entire career and dodge operational test command. Get down there.
Yeah.
Take that step. Go learn testing, because you'd be surprised how many acquisition officers call me and ask me for test experience. Like, hey, how do I navigate like the TSART process of getting soldiers assigned? What are the steps in operational testing within ATEC and Operational Test Command,
Mm,
um, or AEC? Because they don't know, because they've never been there. It's There's a lot of value in it too. And when you go to industry, what's one thing you have to navigate with a program manager is going into operational tests. That's like your final check
yep.
before full material release. First unit equipped. Like, it's a condition setter, right? It's a milestone with embedded within the acquisition lifecycle. And if you don't pay attention to it, or you're not knowledgeable about it, you're probably going to fail, or your system's
Yeah.
going to fail, because you didn't build in your system evaluation plan, your temp. If you don't know those things, if they're in words only, and you don't have that experience, that's a gap. That's a capability gap, right? We talk gaps in modeling and simulation. The foundational structure of which we build requirements off of. That's a gap in your own depth and breadth
Mm,
skill set. So when I retire, all those things said, everything I just mentioned, I want to transition to industry. It's the one part of the life cycle that I haven't experienced. So I got a
Mm,
gap, right? But I think I have a lot to offer and bring to the table in terms of program management, operational experience, and then working across that entire acquisition life cycle. I want to go there. I want to do program management. I want to work on systems that I believe in. So I want to stay in the
yeah.
robotic and autonomous system realm. I want to maintain positive influence and be a contributor. I want to be a giver, not a taker. Um, Across the joint small UAS CDD family of systems. And so, focus really down on that group 1, group 2 level where, that pulls on my heartstrings, and that's, doing things for the maneuver force. So I'm going to stay here at Fort Benning, want to be expeditionary, and I want to work with a company that's working in that joint SWAS CDD strategy space, and continue to work with capability developers across the DoD enterprise to continue to shape this, right? Because you can
Mm,
talk about it. Talking about it is one thing, but you got to actually be about it. And
yep. Deeds, not words.
D's not words. Heart. What'd you say? Head, heart, hand.
Head,
Yeah,
heart, hand.
yeah,
Triple H, your
yeah.
favorite
Triple
wrestler, right?
H.
You just remember
Yeah.
that.
Mine was the Undertaker, actually. So he was more transactional. Um, But yeah, that's what I want to do, Josh, and appreciate you asking me that, man. Not a lot of people ask that.
I think it's important because I mean, this podcast is all about trying to help people on their leadership journey, and life, in my opinion, is an entire journey. Like it is a marathon. Like we have self leadership, we have to learn to lead ourselves. We have a family, we have to learn to lead our families, lead our work. It's some point we all hang up the uniform. We put up our uniform, but we're still going to continue to serve. And in whatever position is lucky enough to have you, whatever organization is lucky enough to have you, they're going to get a disruptive leader, but an amazing motivator at the same time. And that's hard. Like having someone who can motivate and be disruptive at the same time, because usually it's a bold personality, but you have that humble personality, and that's learned through experiences, usually tough experiences that we both share. So I'm excited to see where you take it next, and how you continue to advance like what you're passionate about, what I'm passionate about, and then potentially, still working together. I'd love to have you on the show a year from now just to see that experience, like how you went through the skill bridge process, how you got aligned to a company, how you continue to work to advance this, and where you're at and what you're still passionate about. So I genuinely am appreciative for people like you who have that selfless service. You've already served 25 years, and now you're getting ready to go do that again in the private sector, but it's still towards the same purpose, and you're building that momentum. So
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
yeah. Thank you.
I'd love to kind of get now. You've just broke a record on Tales of Leadership, by the way. I don't think I've ever had a podcast over an hour. I just realized that we've been filming for an hour and 48 minutes. It's like the Joe Rogan show now.
I know it kind of feels like protect our parks without the bourbon. So
But this is awesome, dude. Final show segment. I call it the killer bees. The same 4 questions I like to ask everyone because I have them from private sector leaders to different branches. So I'd love to see what your responses are. Be brief, be brilliant, be present, and be gone. So the first question is, what separates a good leader from an extraordinary leader in your eyes?
doing more than your fair share of the task,
Mm,
that internal acknowledgement that, hey, if I need to cross the line of departure at 05, I'm probably up at 03 doing what I need to prep as a leadership as a leader. And then when are you waking up? When are you waking up the men? How are you giving them their time? It's the 1/3, 2/3 rule, right? But it all boils back to doing more than your fair share of the task, and that's hard for a lot of people to do. And
yeah.
I'd be a liar if I said, even this morning I was like, why in the hell did I choose the 08 time slot?
Yeah.
But I was like, I got up early, man. I got up at
Yeah.
04. Prepped my workstation, got my associated materials, for things I wanted to talk about. That's doing more than your fair share of the task.
Yeah.
It's also respecting you. running this podcast and trying to kick out a really good product and have
Yeah.
dialogue with folks and help people on their transformational path of improving their leadership. It all boils back to doing more than your fair share of the task and chopping wood.
I love that. Always goes back to a quote that I've lived my life by from Aristotle. We are what we repetitively do.
Mhm.
Excellence then isn't an act, it's a habit. I love that, dude. All right. So question 2, what is one resource that you could recommend to our listeners? It could be a book of anything.
Yeah, so I'm reading Tipping Point right
Mm,
now, um, and then also you heard me say the 11 Points of Leadership. So you can Google it. Just Google 11 Points of Leadership, Boy Scouts of America, and scroll down and you'll find them. That was very cutting and informative for me, learning leadership early in life, and I've always kept it with me. So if you don't have that in your toolkit,
yeah.
I'd recommend that. Another one is Dr. Anthony Randall, ex-Army chaplain. He's an assistant scoutmaster with me. Just had a new book come out. Read his book as well, and then always be on that path of learning. Because if you think you got it figured out, you're so wrong. You're so
Yeah.
wrong, right? You can always learn. Constantly inspired by my team and others, and you as well, and Major Chris Simpkins and Major Matt Huff out at the Fire Center. Um, you can always learn. So yeah, I'd say you got to you learn to be either the salesman, the maven, or the connector, right? And then what
Mm,
percentage of each of those, boil it back down to analytics. Dom Edwards, my boss the other day, is like, I really see you as like a 50% connector, and then maybe like 25% maven, and 25% salesman, to make that 100%. And he goes, but the thing with you, Brabs, is that you fluctuate. You can go all in to that pie chart in one piece if you need to. But he goes, I always see you boiling back to being or coming back to being the connector, and that
mm.
and that triad. So yeah, those are three things I would say: Tipping Point, 11 Points of Leadership, and then Dr. Anthony Randall's new book.
I love it. So, third question, if you could go back in time and give your younger self a piece of advice, what would it be?
Don't be so quick to rush to a red light. I think oftentimes we got a lot of tenacity and audacity, and risk taking when we're younger. Um, don't rush to a red light. Take your time. As I look back on a 25-year career and where I am now, I probably wouldn't have been able to be as successful in this job if I hadn't gone through the gauntlet of all the other jobs that I've done over those 25 years. So it's
Yeah.
it's developing depth and breadth and experience. So if you're in a job, even if you're the leader or more so the follower, learn why you're there. Learn everything you can about that job. It's the next man up drill, right?
Yep.
What are you going to do if I'm your platoon leader and I get killed? You have to rise to the occasion. So
Mm,
take all those experience. Life is an experiential learning model, with leadership inflection points sprinkled in along the way where you will grow. My dad always told me, if I did something wrong or whatever, he's always like, Michael, he's like, age and treachery will always overcome youth and exuberance. He's like, I brought you into this world, I can take you out of it there, stud. So tread lightly. My scoutmaster, Greg Tozer, always said I was an equivocator, right? They'd tell me where the line was, and I'd get up on the line, and when they weren't looking, I'd step over the line and I'd push the envelope. So be an equivocator, take risk, and all those other things I just said.
I love it, man. So, the last question, anyone who's listening to this podcast, if they want to reach out, how can they add value to you or what you're trying to do right now?
I'm going to be selfless on this one. If you're in a space across the DoD enterprise, take time out of your day to learn what we are doing with the Joint Small UAS Capabilities Development Document. You're not helping me. You're helping those steely-eyed killers, our warfighters, our soldiers, our airmen, our sailors, our special operations forces, our Coast Guardies. You're helping them. So take a deep look into this robotic and autonomous system space, and then look at what avenues of approach you have, seams you can exploit
Yeah.
with the codified requirements documents, in the existing framework, law, policy, and regulation, and appropriations. beef us up, help us go faster, hold us accountable to regenerate those requirements, and then more so, take those lessons learned if they're deemed to be of value and share them with other teams. They may not know what they don't know, or they may have never been pushed to this extent, but you have to find opportunities in life. And I was very fortunate to find this opportunity in RRD and have Rob Ryan believe in me and who I was and what I could bring to the team. You
Yeah.
know, no man is an island, right? Um, Help. That's really what I want. Don't help me. Help enable the advancement of robotic and autonomous systems. I'll be fine. I'll find my own way. I always do. I'm like a cat. I always land on my feet. Um, but yeah, I really want help across the that space, especially with regard to the Joint Small UAS CDD, because I truly believe in it. I believe in the work we've done, and I think once we start rolling out these systems, we start regenerating and upgrading these systems. The United States and the Five Eyes
Yeah.
are going to be a powerhouse, a world powerhouse, in how we are going to fundamentally change the way we fight wars.
Mm. Dude, this has probably been selfishly one of the best podcasts that I've been able to film because one, I get to reconnect with you, which has been absolutely awesome.
Yeah,
And then two, like we're cut from the same cloth. So it's always refreshing to have someone on that shared the same life experiences. And then we're so aligned with what we're currently doing right now. But I leave it here is that I am appreciative of everything that you've done and continue to do. And it's been a pleasure to kind of know you, my friend. So thank you for being a guest on Tales of Leadership. And if there's anything I can ever do for you, more than willing, just phone call away.
yeah. Let's go fly FPVs, man. Or I'm sorry, let's
Yeah.
go fly purpose-built attritable systems.
Yeah. I'm gonna try to unlearn the term FPV. So I use PBAS from now on.
Thank you. Appreciate it,
Awesome,
Josh.
brother. Yeah. Have a good one. Thank you.